That's a good possibility. Next time that I come to Lithuania, I will fly through Paris, right? So I will have the opportunity of staying 3 days with my wife, hang with my wife in Paris. Good pretext. Okay, so we have Eric Kramer, who will talk about cognitive effort and the unnatural attitude.
My voice is coming out of the heavens. I'm here to collect money, like all good churches. As I was sitting here, it occurred to me that you can see in my being and nothingness the product of Mickūnas. And so if you don't like what I say, it's his fault. If you do like what he said, then it's my fault.
Because you fixed it, right?
Most of the people I realized just sitting here did not spend as much time with Algis as I did. I first met Algis when I was 17 as a freshman. And he stayed in my orbit all the way through my PhD. Most people would drop in, get their master's and leave or something, or maybe work with him on a PhD a little bit. So I think, I don't know how many seminars I sat through with this guy. A lot. I also realized that there's the life of a man here, of a scholar, and I thought I would mention some other names that used to be part of his habitus. Blocker, Lutrick, Ruckty, Weckman, Wyman, Organ, Goodman, Ping, and others. Those were his colleagues. That's not all of them, but many of them for many years. And I was a philosophy major as an undergrad and a philosophy major as a master's student at Ohio. And so I had a chance to work with all those guys. My master's thesis was on Chen or Zen Buddhism, and Troy Organ was the chair, but I learned a lot from Algis. And the thing that I never get over with Algis is when I read his work, how profoundly original it is. He has an amazing mind. He's able to think way out of the box. And over again, I'm always astounded by that. And I've chaired over 50 doctoral students, and I've done my towed that barge, lift that bale in academia for a long time. I would agree with Bert. His mind is incomparable. So I was thinking, maybe I should just make fun of Al about how old he is. 80 years old. And still going because he's pickled in whiskey. So I thought maybe I should turn this into a little bit of a grilling. But it also occurred to me something else. And that is, he was born in 1933. And so I thought in a little, maybe a little too linear for hermeneutics, but in a historiological sense, I would go back and look at exactly what was happening in 1933 when this guy was born in some village here. He likes to call himself a Lithuanian peasant. What was going on? Let me run through a couple of things. On January 5th, 1933, the Golden Gate Bridge construction was begun on the Golden Gate. On the 12th, Congress recognized the independence of the Philippines in the United States. On the 12th of January, there was an uprising of the Guardia in Spain. That same month, the name Pakistan was coined but it didn't exist yet. There was the Pakistani movement just beginning. January 29th, German President von Hindenburg appoints Hitler chancellor. In the United States, the Lone Ranger starts a 21-year run on ABC radio. So this guy has lived to see the invention of television, the invention of the wheel, the invention of writing, let alone the internet and all that other stuff. On January 30th, Hitler forms a government with von Papen. Let's see what else was happening about that time. In February, Hitler dissolves Parliament. On February 6th, a 112-foot wave was observed near Manila. It was the largest wave ever seen. It was not a tsunami to this day. On the 15th, President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt survives an assassination attempt. On February 10th, in the United States, the first singing telegram happened. My students would have no clue what a telegram is today, singing or otherwise. Now, I think this is very important, and I think this has something to do with astrology. The year Algis was born, on the February 20th, the U.S. Congress repealed prohibition. I think that was in Algis's honor. We'll start drinking again. A little more serious, in February of that year, Göring forms the SA and SS and promptly shoots about 50 people. On the 24th, there was the final demonstration of communists in Germany. The League of Nations tells Japan to please stop attacking Manchuria and get out, and then Japan promptly drops out of the League of Nations. Let's see, on the 27th, the German Parliament building, the Reichstag, was destroyed by fire. Of course, it was blamed on the communists. And Jean Genet, Intermezzo, premieres in Paris. The United States always being a leader in all things cultural. On March 2nd, the movie King Kong premiered at Radio City Music Hall. It's up there with Jean Genet. King Kong and Archeo Roxy in New York City. The second most powerful earthquake in 180 years, I'm sorry, the most powerful earthquake ever registered in Japan hits and levels Tokyo. And there's a whole lot of very interesting things about how they got to rebuild Tokyo in a Western way. The Depression hits. Poland occupies the free city of Danzig. Nevada becomes the first state to regulate narcotics. Darn it. Up until 1933, narcotics were free in the U.S. Just take whatever you like, and Al comes along and ruins it for us. On the 13th, Joseph Goebbels becomes German Minister of Information and Propaganda. And in the United States, the Civilian Conservation Corps is formed, which is what my father did. He left home at 15 without a job, and 1933 was the worst year of the Depression in the United States. And that's what saved his life, was joining the 3 Cs. Also in that month, Dachau was completed, the first concentration camp. So Algis was living in interesting times, born in an interesting year. Plastic was invented. That's your fault too, Al. Let's see, in April, Germany begins persecution of Jews, boycotting Jewish businesses. On April 4th, the U.S. dirigible Akron crashes off the coast of New Jersey. April 13th, the first airplane flight over Mount Everest happened, Lord Clydesdale. The U.S. and Germany go off the gold standard. Walt Disney releases 3 Little Pigs. Dmitri Shostakovich premieres Preludes in Moscow. And the Loch Ness Monster is sighted for the first time. So we get back to booze and we start seeing monsters in lakes. All of this, I think, was an astrological, heavenly signs of the coming of Algis Mickūnas. On April 30th, 50,000 demonstrate in Antwerp against fascism and war. July 6th, 1933 was the first all-star baseball game in the United States. And the first time that the police in the United States used radios. Wiley Post begins the first solo flight around the world, and he completes it in 7 days. The Vatican State signs an accord with Adolf Hitler. The Dutch have their first live radio concert, and it's Duke Ellington. The first time ever a human exceeds the speed of 300 miles per hour in an airplane in Glenview, Illinois. Batista takes over Cuba in a military coup. Extermination campaign against communists is launched in Nanjing, China. Sidney Kingsley's Men in White premieres in New York City. Most people know Men in Black. They don't realize that that's actually a play on Men in White. John Dillinger escapes, the great gangster, from the Allen County Jail in Ohio. Alcatraz becomes a federal prison. Langston Hughes, his work Mulatto premieres in New York City. November 5th, this is Al's month of birth, Basques vote for autonomy. The Great Black Blizzard, the first great dust storm, strikes the Great Plains where I live. Pennsylvania repeals blue laws. Blue laws meant that you couldn't do anything on Sundays in the United States. Why did they repeal it? So that national football could be played on Sunday. So football is our true religion. FDR establishes a diplomatic relations with the USSR, which is fairly new. And on the 25th, just 4 days before Al was born, the first Soviet liquid-fueled rocket attains the spectacular altitude of 261 feet or 80 meters. Think of that. Wow, they had a rocket that went 80 meters. December of that year, Fred Astaire has his first movie, Dancing Lady. Fox signs a 5-year-old Shirley Temple to a studio contract, and FM radio is patented. And on December 29th, the Yankees refuse to release Babe Ruth so he can manage the Cincinnati Reds. Babe Ruth. So, 1933 was the worst year of the Great Depression. Thank you, Al. Unemployment in the United States was over 25%. The average cost of a new house was $5,000. The average wage per year was $1,500. A gallon of gas was 10 cents. The average house for rent was $18 a month. A loaf of bread was 7 cents, and a Plymouth car was $445. And the Japanese that year, Japanese scientists proudly demonstrated a machine gun that could fire 1,000 rounds a minute. The Yellow River, or the Yalu River, flooded in China, killing millions. Who else was born in 1933? Yoko Ono, Roman Polanski, James Manfield, Willie Nelson. Mussolini is Prime Minister of Italy, and Stalin is strutting around Russia. So, that was the world that Al was born into. He lived to see the Nazis come and go, and to see the Soviet Empire come and go, and a few other things come and go. 80 years, Al. I salute you. I hope that I am nearly as vital as you are when I'm 80. I hope I am. Now, do I have any time left?
Yeah.
Okay. I will read then a little bit to you. That was everything I've ever written in some way or other has been inspired by the contamination I suffered from Algis Mickūnas. And so I have a paper here on cognitive lifting, and the question is, what method would you use to study methodologies? And it's phenomenology. And my colleagues in communication often find that disturbing. When I ask them, what method did you use to derive your method? I don't know, what are you talking about? We weren't methodical at all. So I'll read a few pages to you here, a little bit if I have time. What I did here was I took on Stephen Hawking and Walter Hertog. Everybody knows Stephen Hawking. He's in a wheelchair because Al punched him out. Over a drink, I think it was. So I'm now going to read a little bit, and you can stop me when it's time. All instruments record what was the case. In fact, telescopes looking out into the cosmos see a universe as it was. And thanks to the constant speed of light, a small single constant we can rely on so far, as we look deeper into space, we see things as they were farther back in time in a smooth correlation of distance to historic time. For this reason, Hawking and Hertog argue that we must work backward, or as they put it, top down, from the now of final boundary conditions to presumed but unknown initial boundary conditions in their study of cosmology. All that we know of the universe is what we have access to now. But what we see now is an accrual of an infinite variance of times that integrally present themselves to my eye together at once. All the stars and galaxies I can see exist at various distances, times. The distances are so vast and the speed of light so slow that as I look into space, I am seeing several times at once. The universe is not two-dimensional, but four-dimensional, or multi-dimensional. If it were just two dimensions, then all I see would be the same distance from me, and I would be looking at a single point in the distant past. But instead, as I behold a multitude of stars and galaxies standing in my backyard, at vastly different distances, I am beholding several points of time in the past, several pictures of the universe at once, integrated, combined, for and in me. All that I see presentiate various cosmic histories, an infinite number appearing to me as a single picture that we may call our reality, our perspective. My cosmic reality is always already integral, and that is understood only when effective time is appreciated. So working backwards, we infer an image, quote unquote, of the universe based on final observable boundary conditions only, quote unquote. It is an image with a depth of infinite layers. Our image is observer and object dependent. In other words, our starting point for cosmological studies, or in fact, I would argue any studies, begins with what we currently know and works backward, just as Nietzsche stated when he said that we always begin with observed effects and work backward to try to identify probable causes. So effects always come before causes in the process of knowing. Nietzsche put it this way. Cause and effect, I'm quoting Fred here, cause and effect is what one says, but we have merely perfected the image of becoming without reaching beyond the image or behind it. In every case, the series of causes, quote unquote, confronts us much more completely, and we infer. First, this and that has to precede in order that this or that may then follow. But this does not involve any comprehension. We operate only with things that do not exist. Lines, planes, bodies, atoms, divisible time spans, divisible spaces, cause and effect. Such a duality probably never exists. In truth, we are confronted by a continuum out of which we isolate a couple of pieces, just as we perceive motion only as isolated points, and then infer it without ever actually seeing it. We see cause and effect not as a continuum and a flux, but in terms of an arbitrary division and dismemberment, end quote. Which is exactly what Hawking and Hertog mean by an amplitude of interest. An image of a universe inflating backward from our point of view. What Gebser called the pyramidal structure of perspectival consciousness, a cone of interest, a hermeneutic horizon pivoting on an egocentric point from which we gaze up or out into the heavens, a profound bias, but a bias without which there would be no history, no reality at all. And as noted before, all things, all objects as events manifest a hermeneutic horizon. All things we behold have horizons of their own. Each planet, star, nebula, and galaxy has its own horizon. Each one arrives to me after journeys of various, quote, lengths of time, end quote. The spectral array of the sky opens up to me an infinitude of histories layered and layering, integrating into a single collage of luminous image. Plurality is realized in a common instant. Infinity not in depth, but in magnitude of histories, streaming into my eyes. And so, the infinite increments of time from the nearest object, the moon, to the most distant object I can see sediment at me, on my window pane, to constitute my picture of the universe. What appears are innumerable biases, an infinite number of temporal perspectives, an infinitude of horizons. This is what Hawking and Hertog miss as they tack back and forth between the opposing paradigms of observer-dependent and observer-independent pictures of the universe. Instead, what I suggest is the interdependence of an infinite plenum of information sources streaming across vast but varied distances to compile my now. The most interesting thing Hawking and Hertog note is that the set of measures available to me, the set of final boundary conditions that terminate on me, is the starting point for knowing the cosmos. As noted in terms of knowing, the effect precedes the cause. Other cosmic pictures are not directly available to me, but through inference. One starts out with the, quote, late time constraints on the alternative and select subclass of histories that contribute to the amplitude of interest, end quote. Histories for Hawking and Hertog are pluralized by imagining different observers in different space and time coordinates. But histories for me are always already given in the plenum of information sources, the array of stars and galaxies at vastly different distances that constitute my singular vista. For all their iconoclasm, Hawking and Hertog are stuck in perspectival modernity and perspectival consciousness. They say there are multiple histories of the universe that depend on the precise question asked. That's the amplitude of interest. Quote, we study the observational consequences of no boundary initial conditions on the landscape that admits several alternative inflationary histories, end quote. In other words, the picture of the cosmic reality we have is perspectival. I tend to amplify my interest in my own sense of the present, directly observable picture. I am, as Derrida might say, logocentric. And yet, absence is present by implication with what is here now. And since all things and events presentiate a perspective, a horizon, the pyramidal reality that entraps the modern ego, is exploded into a sphere of infinite times and perspectives that are ever present. I will stop there.